Okay, welcome to another episode of the Regenerative Health Podcast. Today I am in near Murrum Bateman in New South Wales, and I'm sitting down with a special guest, Mr. Edwin Rous. Now, Mr. Rous is a Nguni cattle breeder, and he has got a very interesting story, having brought Nguni cattle from Africa, where he used to live, to Australia, and this is where he breeds them now. Before we get into the podcast, I just want to give everyone a bit of a background about the Nguni breed. And for those who listened to previous episodes, I've interviewed both Jake Wolke and Bryant Usher of Eastwell Farms. Now, these gentlemen both run Nguni cattle, and I met Bryant at a farmer's market, and I learnt about this breed of cattle that he was grazing regeneratively up near Queensland. I was immediately caught by how beautifully elegant this animal was in terms of its adaptability and lack of need for human intervention in the whole process of breeding, of calving, and of just generally thriving in environments that didn't need human intervention in the form of vaccination, in the form of drenching, in the form of pulling calves, in the form of tick treatment. So I met Brian, and then following that, I talked to Jake, and it wasn't long after I'd talked to Jake about the breed that he managed to buy himself two Nguni bulls. So it's an incredibly exciting breed, and I really think it has enormous potential for a low intervention, a highly robust cattle breed that tastes amazing and is able to be grazed regeneratively in a really efficient way. So, Ed, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Morning, Max. No, it's I'm passionate about the Ngunis, and it's always nice talking about them.
Cool. Well, let's start about your story, because even before we talk about the breed, because you came from Africa, and there is a very interesting story about how you initially started to bring the cattle over. So maybe all the way at the beginning, how did you get into farming, and how did you find the Ngunis to start with?
So initially, uh, my parents farmed with Aberdeen Angus, and we're in an area that's semi-arid area, the 14-inch rainfall, and my parents used Nguni bulls to open up the Angus cows, and they were very impressed with the progeny that came out. And when my brother and I started farming, we then went to just Ngunis and got rid of the Angus, and because they were doing so well, and we travel around the country sourcing different genetics that we could find, and sales in remote areas, buying in different females and bulls, and then later we joined the society. And initially, the early days, they were more based on an F rating. If you bought cows out of the rural areas, the animals were given an F rating to breed out purity. Later years, all animals, that were on the system were then stud animals, So, apart from that, it was a bit of an adventure, traveling around the country, seeing new areas, and then seeing how different farmers, how the animals, the early days, the farmers would go into these rural areas, and because the Zulus, um, their wealth is in their cattle. Money doesn't mean anything to them. And so when people wanted to come and buy cattle from them, they just laughed at them. They said, "No, we don't want money." And so they would go in there with truckloads of cattle, and a lot of cases would be Brahman cattle into these areas. And they would swap cows for Nguni cows. And a few years later, in some cases, they would swap maybe two or three cows for an Nguni, and when they came a few years later, with the same lot, these chaps just said to them, "Listen, we're not interested. All those cattle have died that you've given us." So there's something about them. They handle the tick areas, and it doesn't affect them negatively.
Mm. So you were traveling around South Africa. Is that where you were living at the time, or yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah,
around South Africa. So
yeah.
we were in the Karoo area. That's where I lived and farmed with my brother and I each had our own farm,
Mm.
and but then we would travel around to various sales in the country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the listener, this cattle breed, it's a tribal animal. I want the listener to understand that point, is that it was an animal that was bred by the tribal people in South Africa for specific traits, and those being hardiness, ability to survive, and everything else that we're going to talk about.
Yes, well, the breed have actually evolved over thousands of years as they've migrated from North Africa through the Tsetse Belt and the Congo, which is of the worst diseased areas. So it was actually survival of the fittest. Animals in those days, the chaps didn't have vets and treatment for to keep the animals alive. So only the fittest survive, and apart from that, predators and that selected for them, and you know being nomadic, the animals had to coexist with their humans. So they had a lot of placid temperaments.
Mm.
Um, the ones that were wild and wouldn't come into the byre at night, uh, you know, they were eaten. So
Yeah.
so so they sort of selected for the wild ones were eaten. So they're not they've evolved. The Nguni has evolved over a long time to the breed that we've got today.
Yeah. And I love it how you made the point that the Zulus, they weren't willing to take paper money. Their
No.
money was cattle.
Yes.
That was their form of money, and they weren't happy to take any kind of pieces of paper for it. And the Brahman cow, which is Bos indicus, I believe, that's a Indian
Yes,
initially
the
breed.
zebu.
Yeah, so they're obviously they're being used in Australia, particularly for things like drought resistance, but they obviously weren't cutting the mustard in the harsh environment of Africa.
No,
Mm.
no, they didn't. They didn't survive in this the one area called the Makatini, which is a very sour felt, um, and animals are small frame because of the harsh conditions and unpalatable food.
Mm.
um, and it's along the coast, so it's probably one of the worst areas you'd want to farm cattle in,
Yeah.
and possibly largely it's one of the areas where British influence couldn't get their cattle in, because in the when the British ruled South Africa, they weren't the native cattle, as they were called, were not allowed to be bred. So they had to farm with the new improved cattle. So the Nguni survived only in areas where other cattle couldn't survive,
Ah.
because the British wanted their Angus or their Herefords or whatever they had. They were introducing them and wanted them to be the new breed, and
Mm.
so these areas, and then there's another country within South Africa called Swaziland, and there's a lot, obviously, more palatable grass, and there were Ngunis too, and in the early years when the farmers got Ngunis, they uh, would discriminate against solid colors, because a black animal resembled a Drakensberger, or a red animal resembled an Afrikaner. Um, and then polled animals could have been classed as non-indigenous, coming from European influence, so they were discriminated against, so they weren't kept. And only later years, when more polled animals came out, the farmers actually did more research and said, well, it's actually, it's in a trait within them, but they weren't selected for polleness in the early years. So,
For the listener, polled is the presence of horns.
yes,
Yeah.
absence of horns.
Sorry, the absence of horns.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So most of the Ngunis that were farmed in the early years had horns.
Yes.
And,
Okay.
and horns in Africa is probably a good thing, because they both grazers and browsers.
Yeah.
So they use their horns to break branches so that they can start feeding for longer time without the plants sort of producing tannins and while they're grazing.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. Okay, so you were breeding and grazing and raising Ngunis with your brother in South Africa throughout the early 2000s. What happened, or what describe the journey then from what was happening at the time in Africa, and what happened to make you move to Australia?
well, I'm married to an Australian woman, and always spoke about how conditions were, safety in Australia. So that was all in the back of our mind, and where my farm was situated, I had a lot of problems with theft, with small stock. So initially, the government, the ANC government, um, were acquiring land for emerging farmers, and so we sold our farm because of all the problems that we were having. And I put my cows through quarantine, or 18 different genetic lines plus bulls, and they were flushed embryos from them, and to meet Australian protocol. And I um, they were they were there probably 3 months before they were actually flushed, because they had to have tests and uh, you know make sure that they weren't carrying any diseases and various things. So it was quite a costly exercise.
Yes. So for the listener, you were trying to bring your Nguni genetics, your Nguni animals to Australia, and you're doing so not by bringing the cow itself, but by bringing the embryo.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's correct. Yeah. So the cows get fertilized, and the embryos get washed out of the cows.
After they've been fertilized, but so they're naturally joined by the.
Well, in those conditions, they were artificially inseminated.
Okay.
The bulls were in the quarantine as well, but because they synchronized the cows, it's difficult to join each cow all the time.
Yes.
So they were artificially inseminated, and then 7 days after joining, uh, the embryos get washed out of the fallopian tubes,
Okay.
and there's a small little sieve, uh, like a thing that catches the embryos microscopically,
Wow.
and then to meet the more of the protocol, the embryos then get graded, and the ones that will make the freezing, they get washed in a form of an acid, which burns the outside wall of the embryo, killing off any potential threat that could come into Australia. And then after that, they get washed again, and then they go into another medium, which is a growing medium that strengthens the wall again, the cell wall, and then they get frozen. So conception back in Australia was very poor because of the embryos were weakened. You can call it. So
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. So So you made the decision to come to Australia because of basically safety and things were deteriorating economically in Africa, and you'd managed to freeze a whole bunch of your Nguni embryos, and so you traveled to Australia. How did you get reconstitute your genetics or your bloodlines into Australia? What type of cattle were you using to then implant the embryos in?
So the embryos up in southern Queensland were put into Angus cows, Angus heifers, and then later years there was a farmer in near Texas in I'm not sure if it's northern New South Wales or southern,
Northern New South Wales,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and he had on his farm he put in embryos, and then you paid him for a live calf. So and that's how initially I got into getting my as I call them, the miracle cattle, getting
Yeah.
them, getting them, yeah, So
Cool. All
yeah.
right. And great. Now, what do your role at the moment is mainly a breeder? Is that correct, or you also grazing and selling into the meat market?
Now I'm predominantly just a breeder
Okay.
at this stage. All my my male animals I've been keeping up to this point as bulls.
Yeah.
Um, but I've got to a point now where you can only sell so many bulls. So probably 5% of my bulls now are being kept, and the rest I've been castrating.
Yeah.
And so we in a phase where I'm giving some animals, selling some animals to Jacob,
Yeah.
uh, where he will try them in his paddock to plate business.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And it's who else is providing these Nguni? Are there other Australian breeders who are offering Nguni, or are you the main provider of Nguni bloodline here in Australia?
No, there were a number of breeders, people that imported them. There's a Dr. Harvey Roo. He's based now in Toowoomba, and he's got a stud called Genesis. And then there's Henry Townsend, that's got a gene pool
Mm.
as well. And then there's another guy, GT Ferreira, that's got different genetics totally,
Yeah.
and he's also based in Albury area.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
yep.
Fantastic. Well, I think this is a great opportunity to discuss about why both you and I are so excited about this cattle breed, and maybe you could give the listener an idea about some of its attributes. We previewed a couple of them. You've got a great flyer here that you made up of the qualities of the Nguni cattle. So the number one is exceptional fertility, and the maturing heifers can calve at around 20 to 24 months old. So for the lot of non cattle people and listen to my podcast, so what that means is that they're able to have a baby at a young age. You don't need to perhaps leave them and wait longer before you can start they can start having calves. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in my herd, animals don't get weaned. I try and keep it as natural as possible. And heifers, the cows have to wean their own calves.
Mm.
And when they are ready to breed, the bulls will join them.
Mm.
And so I've had cows calving at 18 months. Um, and one particular cow that I've got now in my herd, she's a 2018 drop, makes her 5 years old, and she's about to have a sixth calf.
Wow.
You know, so
Yeah.
she calved at 18 months,
Yeah.
and it hasn't affected her negatively,
Yeah.
her growth or anything. She's a normal size Nguni.
Yes, and look, some of the British breeds they keep the cows separate until they're like 3 years old, and then they bring the bull in and join them. They don't run the bull with the herd, and the reason is because uh, the cows can be if they're not old enough, then they can get more likely to get stuck calves. So the beauty that of the Nguni, which we're talking about, is that we don't need to separate the bull from the cow.
That's correct.
And when they're ready to ovulate, they'll ovulate and they'll be able to have a viable calf. Yeah.
That's correct. So normally I have the dominant bull, plus I have a couple of young bulls running there to try and simulate a natural. So in some cases, like in all cases, I have to do DNA on all the calves to prove who the father was, and in some cases the father has been a young bull,
upcoming bull. Yeah.
So people think, oh no, it's the big dominant bull, he does everything, but when he's busy with another cow, there's a young bull jumps in. So they and apart from that, the cows have got a sloping pelvis, which makes him sort of appear to look a bit like a Jersey cow in the hindquarters. And so, because of the sloping pelvis, it's like kicking a ball in rugby terms, straight in front of the poles, as opposed to coming from an angle. Your pelvic area is a lot bigger.
Interesting. To facilitate easy joining, do you mean?
No, easy calving.
Easy calving, okay.
So once a Nguni cow has calved and she's open, you can put any bull over her. You can put the biggest frame Chianina, those Italian breeds, over her, and her body determines the size of the fetus. They've got that ability in them, and so they have no calving problems.
Wow! So any size bull will be able to join with her, and the fetus won't get stuck.
No.
Wow.
And so the same goes with bulls. If you put Nguni bulls over heifers of other breeds, they have a small birth weight calf. So my neighbour, who's got Angus, continuously had problems with calving dystocias and calving problems, and he said to me, the one year he had a couple of heifers left. He'd sold all these other heifers, and these were the tail end heifers. And he said, well, let's do an experiment, and I want to see if these bulls are as good as what you say they are. And we put an Nguni bull over 31 Angus heifers, and he's got 31 calves born, and they're all born fine.
Wow.
They didn't need help, and they even though they a couple of probably a month younger than his normal herd calves, they're growing quite fast.
Yeah.
So the hybrid figure in them is a good thing.
Yeah. All right, great. And so the next point that you've written here is high resistance to parasites. So internal and external parasites. So can you explain that point a little bit?
Yeah. So in their phenotype, what they've got a loose skin. So when in the heat, when you see a fly sitting on their body, it's almost like throwing a stone into a pond. When you see the ripple effect, you just see the skin rippling, and they're very sensitive, their skin. So when an animal, when an insect sits on them, they can feel it, and their skin moves, and also sort of getting rid of the fly or whatever. And then they also got a tail that swishes all the time, and what makes them different to other cattle in the actual tail, where the hair comes out of the tail, there's no bone there. It's just skin and a bit of cartilage. So you can take the whole tail and turn it at 180 degrees, and it won't break. It's like an Angus cow. They have a bone all the way to the end of the tail,
Mm.
and so this is almost developed like a swatting mechanism
Mm.
for swatting insects and whatever. And then you know, handling their teats are small. So where they would in Africa walking in conditions where there's lots of thorns and also obviously ticks eating the nipples off. Uh, they don't have that issue. In some cases they found that the Hereford cows on those conditions had no teats left.
Wow.
The ticks had eaten them off.
Yeah.
And the Ngunis, in some cases they'd find them that they have maybe 2 or 3 teats, and
Yeah.
they would lose the odd teat through the ticks, but generally, they were still raising a calf.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
And what Brian has talked about the ability of the Nguni to secrete a special oil that is toxic to ticks.
Yes.
What are the Nguni's tick defense mechanisms?
Um, well, that is the septum in the skin that they secrete is makes it sort of unpalatable for the tick to find it comfortable to stay on the car.
Yeah.
Apart from that, they, being sensitive, they are able to bite off themselves the ticks in in areas. You often will see a cow bending down and behind a fetlock almost area, she'll be biting at a tick down in that area, trying to get rid of it. So
Mm.
so they a lot more adapt to their body as such. Knowing what's there's something foreign there, and then obviously in Africa they've got the Red Bull oxpecker, and because they you don't have to dip them and treat them. These birds are like on buffalo and things that they live on the cattle and are able to sort of clean off ticks and things like that too.
Or like a symbiotic
Relationship,
yeah,
yeah.
fantastic, great. And we talked briefly. We talked about calving, the mothering ability. Tell us about the mothering of these cows compared to maybe other breeds.
Well, they cows are, they'll generally, in a lifespan probably have up to a 20-year-old cow will have had 18 calves possibly in her life. Um, they have got a functional udder. It's not overly big, but the milk is enough to sustain the calf, and obviously the Xhosa people or the Nguni people used to milk them as well. So they would also discriminate against cows that weren't able to be milked. So um, that was their livelihood. So they selected for ones that had better milking. Um, so you know the the calves. They did very well on the on the rich milk on the cows.
Yeah. How, I mean, for a lot of people who aren't aware of or into agriculture, they might not know how significant what you said about the 18 calves in 20 years. Just give us an idea about why that is so important and how that compares to the type of cows like Angus, like Hereford, that most cattle breeders in Australia would be using.
Well, replacement cattle. Uh, you need to keep a certain amount of replacement heifers each year to replace the older cows that you're getting rid of. And generally speaking, uh, in our area, where the farmers will keep an Angus cow for not more than 10 years, and then she'll get passed on
To the
and
meat works.
to the meatworks, and then the heifers, the replacement heifers that he's bred, would have come through the system. And with the Ngunis, you've got a longer longevity, and cows can live up to 18 odd years, and so you've got less need for replacement heifers. So you can potentially sell more animals to other breeders. Unless and obviously if your herd can go quicker
Yes.
too if you're keeping them.
Yeah, and this is a great point, a great opportunity to talk about the economics, because a lot of people or maybe farmers who are listening, like, okay, all these features are interesting, but the economics is, I think, something that is really attractive. So what we've talked about already is that one heifer or one female cow is able to have a working life that is much, perhaps even double an Angus cow. So it can reliably have a cow every year for 18, 20 years compared to the 10 years of one of the British breeds. And you're also less likely to have to pay vet bills because you're not having to pull them. You're not spending money um, on drenches and vaccination. Now, is that for uh, is that do you regeneratively graze your cows, or is that even if you set stock in Nguni, will you still not need to use those types of uh, like vaccinations and these type of things?
So my cattle are grazed, cell grazing.
Yeah,
With I use electric fencing,
yeah,
um, and so we don't try not to set stock. So it's all about improving the soil,
yeah.
um, and because you are not treating them for parasites and putting boron on them, your dung beetles and the like, in Australia, aren't getting killed because it's not passing through into the dung. Um, so it's a health. It's the whole cycle where the soil's getting healthier, and I've been here to not long enough to have made a difference. But you know just their easy care, because you don't have as you're saying, minimal veterinary costs. um, you know you don't you're not getting as a bigger calf as your other cattle have, but because of the smaller frame cow that you've got, you you are able to keep more mouths in a given area than you would a, a conventional British breed. In our area, yeah, the cows are Angus type are sort of weighing 500-600 kilograms, um, and my cows are sort of weighing 400 kilograms, and so based on that, you can run more stock, and then you've got that hoof action on the ground. Um, you know, it's all if managed correctly. You improve. As a custodian on the land, you improve things. So
Yeah. So that's a great point. You're able to run more cows at a for a given area because you're breeding more per year and they're smaller, and plus the Ngunis are requiring less feed to maintain their condition compared to certain other British breeds in terms of how much they're eating. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
another point is, if you had enough Nguni cows, and you do decide to put a bigger bull over them and not an Nguni bull, say a Charolais or a Chianina or whatever it was, that cow would probably wean 60% of her body mass in the calf. Those formulas have been proved in South Africa to, that no other breed will produce the most kilograms like in that actual cross. So as a maternal line, um, you know, they're excellent. Obviously, we have the problem where we don't have enough females. So we're trying to rectify that by now we've got a couple of projects where we trying to flush embryos and increase the temper, of pure animals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up on a point that you made just before, which is to do with the regenerative aspect of this, because we've talked a lot about the breed itself, but what you mentioned is that you, like Jake, like Bryant, are grazing these in a regenerative way. The goal being to improve the quality of the soil. And for those who aren't familiar about regenerative farming, check out my earlier episodes. But the essential, or one of the key points, is that we're using the animal as a tool to help improve the pasture and improve the land, improve the soil quality, improve the microbial activity of the soil. And when you use an animal like a Nguni that doesn't need drenching, you're actually accelerating that process because things like dung beetles are able to thrive. Whereas if you'd use chemical inputs onto the cow, then there'd be less microbial activity in the dung, and therefore the whole goal of regenerating the soil would take longer. So I think that's a really important point, which is when we don't intervene with with the animals, or we use the right animals, then the whole process of land regeneration happens quicker than if we were, say, using the British breed and giving them those chemical inputs. The I guess what we haven't talked about yet is something that probably a lot of people are thinking about, which is what do these animals taste like? I've got an opinion. I think they taste pretty good. And I was eating Bryant's Ngunis up in Queensland. What would you say to people that might say, okay, Ed, like you've got this breed that's very robust. It can eat all kinds of different food, but what is it actually going to be tasting like?
Well, their meat is, everyone's worrying about marbling these days. They don't marble as much as a wagyu does or anything like that. But I have obviously, we the years in South Africa used to eat our own beef, and all this like we just took it for granted, that it's great food. Um, and then until we came here, a couple of people in my area had asked me for some meat, and we had a British breed, and a steer, and I processed this animal, and they were very impressed because it's grass fed and whatever. They came back to me and they said, "Listen, whenever you do it again, we're interested in having some more." And the next year, I had an Nguni, and the chap phoned me up after he had got the meat, and he said to me, "What is this meat? Because it's so good." And he said, "My wife's invited all these friends that we have a barbecue, and I've told them they can't come anymore because I'm not sharing this meat with anybody." So it was that good,
Yeah.
and so they that's just a little bit of uh, testing that I've had. Yeah.
Great. And maybe before we talk about the future of maybe the herd, I just wanted to touch on a point about what they can and can't eat. And Jake sent me a video of a couple of Nguni browsing in southern Namibia, and it was completely drought. It's just drought. There's not a blade of grass anywhere. And there were 3 or 4 Ngunis in perfect condition. So there's no ribs showing. They were in perfect condition, and they were browsing on what looked like incredibly thorny, um, not very palatable brush. But the point of that video was that they're so adaptable from a feed point of view that they can thrive in all kinds of marginal country and eat types of feed that other cows can't eat. So, what have you seen about their ability to eat and different foods, different shrubs in Australia compared to maybe Africa?
Well, I mean, we don't have as much browse for them, and that means more shrubs, mostly good grass and stuff. But where I have some adjustment, um, where an area where there's lots of invasive tussock grass, and I've noticed them eating the tussock, um, and you know eating a lot of they're a lot less selective in their eating. Um, so they're not chasing all the candy all the time. They're eating the Brussels sprouts and all the not as good stuff. You able to your felt or your pastures are able to regenerate because there's not a species that's been what's the word
Neglected or avoided?
where they've hit a certain grass more than others
Selectively, yeah,
selectively,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so that the less selective one starts invading.
Yeah, yeah,
So you don't get that
yeah.
happening.
So I mean, look, it sounds like this is a perfect animal for helping regenerate the soil and regenerating the environment because, as you said, they're eating everything. They're not just eating the most palatable clover or grasses. They're eating absolutely everything. In addition to and thriving on that. It's not like they're eating them and just getting by or having less carbs because that's a criticism of perhaps Brahman. If you put them on more marginal country, their fertility might be more impacted. But the fascinating thing about these Ngunis is that they're eating all this non this marginal feed and still producing one calf a year for 20 years. And so that is there any other point you want to make about the attribute of the Nguni?
Well, apart from in their grazing, they've tested. They've got a higher urea level in their blood, which they're able to convert roughage into meat without added urea licks or the like, and that's mainly based on them in the rural areas in Africa. Around every homestead area, the grass would be depleted because that's where they come home, and then as they go out they eat everything there. There's goats and sheep, and so they'd have to walk maybe 20 kilometers to get to good grass but be back tonight. Otherwise these predators are going to nail them, so uh, they didn't have the choice of eating good grasses all the time, and so they had this higher urea level in their that and they found out that these animals were actually in times of stress were actually drinking each other's urine,
Wow.
and that would when they're urinating they're actually picking that up, and actually that's one of their mechanisms of survival in the dry times.
So they were able to drink urine, which is very high in nitrogenous waste of any mammal, is obviously excreting these waste products, but they were still able to thrive or survive despite drinking. Wow, that is their food source.
Yeah.
Incredible animal, incredible. So let's talk now about to maybe wrap up on this, maybe your vision for Nguni in Australia, because from my point of view, this is such an amazing animal, and it's for the attributes and the that we've just talked about, it's got such potential to not only help regenerate the land but feed people, and really healthy, fully grass-fed meat, which is going to have a range of advantages over feedlot grain-fed meat, particularly with regard to the omega-3 to 6 ratio. But what's your hope or your vision for Nguni in Australia, for your, maybe your operation, and then for Nguni in Australia?
Well, I would like, more and more people. I've always said that the more people that farm in Ngunis, the healthier it is. Um, so for me, they're definitely a breed that can sustain, uh, any operation. Where they've got paddock to plate enterprises in the more marginal areas, where feed is a bit scarcer. They can go into those areas, as as well as the tropical areas. They're very adaptable to all climates, and felt types. So my hope is that that it doesn't just become a statistic in the country where Nguni were here, but they've disappeared. I would like them to carry on, breed, as a breed throughout Australia, and to be recognised as a breed on its own. There's been a number of other breeds that have been introduced over time, the Tuli and the Mashona, and through various projects where they've bred composites out of them. They've sort of disappeared to a degree. There are some people actually breeding them up again, but I just don't want that sort of to happen, where people want to crossbreed with them too much, and then the breed will disappear. Get watered down, as such. So the more people that can actually breed pure animals, the better. I'd say.
Yeah, great. So someone listening is interested about the Ngunis. They can obviously check out my earlier podcast with Jake Wolke and Brian Usher to learn a bit more. But where else can they find out more information about the Ngunis?
So I've got a website. It's www.henhamfarm.au, and then there's Genesis has got a website, and then if they want to find out past, they can Google the South African Nguni Society, and there's a number of letters, not letters, but uh, um, papers based on ticks and various trials that I've run that are available there. Unfortunately, we haven't done too many trials with them here in Australia, but it's early days still.
Yeah, and look, if there's anyone in the agricultural sciences who's listening, or anyone, get in touch, and maybe we could put you together, and maybe we could do some research projects that outline how fantastic the animal is, and study some of these things. All right, great. And any other, I guess, if they're interested in perhaps purchasing animals, or they can get in contact with you, is your contacts will be in the show notes. I'll put them down below and through the website. So any final parting thoughts that you have, Ahmed?
I'm just passionate about the Nguni, and you know want more people like me out there with the Ngunis, and to see, just when I came to Australia, I found it hard for me, leaving Africa, and when I go and sit with my cows, it was like, they like psychologists in a way. They sorted all my problems out,
Yeah, yeah.
and they it's sort of I don't know. I've got a very soft spot for them. They'll come and sit around when I go and sit in the paddock. They'll just come and lay around me,
Wow.
and just there. I don't know what it is. Being around you that does something to your soul. And so you know there are a couple of people that have got Ngunis, and they just say um, they are so different. To the normal cattle as such. They're not cattle; they special animals. Um,
Fantastic. Well, great. Thank you so much, Ed. Thanks for sharing all your amazing knowledge and insights on this amazing breed. And there's Ed's very kindly given me a book, the Nguni of the
Makatini.
Marcatini Flats. So that's a great one. I think Jake's got a copy as well. So yeah, all that information I'm going to put in the show notes. If you're a farmer, maybe send an email to Ed and get in touch about how you can get some Ngunis, and let's help spread the message and help regenerate the land using these cattle that are so fit for purpose and have such amazing temperaments and are so are great. I think is in so many different aspects. So good, and thanks again, Ed, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, how was that? I really appreciated Edwin sitting on a freezing Sunday morning in Murrum Bateman to record this podcast with me and to give us insights into this cattle breed. I think the story of Nguni arriving in Australia via embryos by Edwin, but not only Ed, but also a couple of other breeders is a real fascinating story. And I just think that based on the attributes that we talked about and the variety of landscapes and the harshness of the Australian climate, they're such a perfect fit for this land. If you're interested in Nguni, I've included a bunch of resources now in the show notes. I'm really interested in talking to more people who are breeders or have worked with Nguni. So get in touch with me. Once again, I'd encourage people to meet their farmer, try and source regeneratively raised meat. You'll be doing the right thing for your health, for the environment, and um, for the land. If you're enjoying the content, then I'd appreciate a review or just sharing. Yeah, it'll all helps. Thank you very much for listening, and yeah, leave any comments or contact me if you have any questions or comments. Regenerative health at proton.me. Thanks again.